I am Anna Seawold, and this is Authentic Parenting, a podcast about growing ourselves while raising our children. I'm a psychologist, educator, and parent coach, and on this podcast, I explore how you can connect to your authentic self, practice radical self-care, and raise emotionally healthy children. Let's break the cycle of generational trauma for a more peaceful, kind, and compassionate world. Today, post-traumatic parenting. What if the biggest thing standing in the way of the parent you want to be isn't your lack of patience or the right parenting strategy, but your own unresolved trauma? My guest today, Dr. Robyn Koslowitz, is a clinical child psychologist, trauma expert, and author of Post-Traumatic Parenting. She explains how the trauma app we download in childhood keeps running in the background of our parenting and how to finally rewrite it. In this conversation, you'll learn the 5 types of post-traumatic parents, why perfectionism doesn't work, and what it takes to break the cycle so you can raise emotionally healthy kids without burning out. Her core message is simple yet profound. Your inner child can't raise a child, but raising your real-world child can heal your inner child. She blends clinical expertise, research-backed tools, and lived experience to empower parents to transform trauma into growth and what it actually means to become an R2 parent. Responsive and responsible. Most importantly, we dig into what healing looks like, how to repair with your kids, why it's never too late to start, and how parenting can become a pathway to your own growth. This is a conversation full of compassion, wisdom, and practical tools. Please enjoy, and thank you for listening. Welcome to the podcast, Robyn. I am delighted to have you.
Thanks so much for having me. I'm so excited for our conversation.
I know. Okay, so tell me, what is post-traumatic parenting, PTP?
So post-traumatic parenting is all about stopping our damage from damaging our kids. And it's really about the impact of trauma on parenting, because I feel like a lot of parenting books are out there, right? And people look at parenting books. And what I tend to hear about parenting books is the persistent sense of shame and guilt people have. People in my practice who come in and say, you know how many books I own that just sit on my shelf and I never even look at them, or I've never even downloaded the title I purchased on Audible or whatever. Or I read the book and I'm like, great. So whoever this person is who wrote the book, come to my house and take care of my kid. I don't know what to do. It just made me feel worse. Like nothing felt actionable or doable in this book at all. And a lot of that is trauma. Like a lot of times the reason a parent wakes up in the morning and says I'm going to parent this way and then goes to bed feeling like a failure. Why that happened is not because you're stupid or you're lazy or you don't love your kids or you just don't have no willpower or you're not good at time management, whatever. A lot of that is your trauma blocked you from parenting the way you wanted. And that's really what the book is about. It's like the prologue to all the parenting books that you're not able to benefit from.
Okay, I'm with you. And of course, not everybody is the same, right? It's sort of like a spectrum. It comes easily for some people, the parenting, and a lot harder for some, right? What can you say about that in terms of the trauma, when the trauma occurred? Because you write about that in the beginning of the book.
So certainly depending on the time period of your trauma, like what trauma happened to you. But a lot of times for a lot of post-traumatic parents, sometimes it's not about the trauma of what happened. Sometimes it's about the trauma of absence, like what didn't happen, either because of what happened. So for example, a parent is incarcerated and then because of that, the remaining parent at home is very stressed out, which means they weren't emotionally present, which means maybe they parentified the child that was at home, right? So the big thing that happened is dad went to jail, and then the stuff that didn't happen mom being present, mom being attuned, mom noticing that the daughter is being very stressed out because she's being parentified now and taking on responsibilities that she's way too young for. All of that, mom not intervening when a teacher is really bullying and shaming a child because she's overwhelmed working two jobs because her husband's incarcerated, right? That those are all the traumas that didn't happen for you. And sometimes the traumas that didn't happen for you are more subtle. It's like harder. It's not like in a movie where it's like, when we cue the scary music because like the car crash is about to happen, right? The axe wielding murderer is about to like, burst into the scene. It's sort of that montage of like all the missed moments, right? The kid being at the play and looking into the audience, and there's all these parents there except for her mom. The kid being on the playground and everybody's making fun of her, and then she comes home and there's no one there to tell, right? It's those things that it's very hard for people to pinpoint because it's not this one discrete event, right? Or sometimes a parent, it's not that it's trauma necessarily, but sometimes a parent is parented more harshly than their nervous system can tolerate. And now maybe they're trying to put some structure into their parenting, but their inner child is like, oh no, you know what that felt like. Don't do that to our kids the way that was done to you. So let's say I had that recently with a parent whose husband was very enamored with the old school approach of 1, 2, 3 magic, where it's like very structured, positive discipline kind of thing. I have my own feelings about that, but she felt so blocked because anytime she started like, doing the that's a 1, that's a 2 with her kid, she felt like she's being exactly like her father, who was a very harsh, very strict, very punitive parent. And even though she's a very soft person by nature, soft spoken, diffident, sensitive. And even though she actually never got into it with her father, like she was fine. Her father never had to punish her the way he did discipline her siblings, but his harshness landed very hard on her nervous system. And anytime she has to impose a limit on her inner child is like, oh no, you're being like dad. And she can't do it. And actually, in that case, we had a very long conversation about how parents way overvalue consistency. What if dad does 1, 2, 3 magic and you don't? Who cares? That would be totally fine. Kids can adjust. Kids know that like library voices are different than playground voices. Kids know that like rules at grandma's house for a sleepover are different than rules at, a regular Wednesday night at home. Like kids know that. So why can't it be dad does 1, 2, 3 magic and mom doesn't?
Well, it may create conflict in the couple, right? And that can be difficult, like a different source of problems. I think, yes, I agree with you generally. Most people want to get on the same page and parent the same way, but how realistic is that? And in what kind of world can two parents parent the same way? You didn't have the same childhood. Even if you grew up in the same household, it would never, ever be the same.
I think
And
it's a
yeah,
myth, consistency.
sometimes, yeah, consistency.
I think it's a myth, right? Sorry, I don't mean to interrupt you, but I think it's a myth, this idea of consistency. I think you're right.
Consistency in maybe in values, right? In certain values, but not maybe in the same way you handle things. Well, that's a whole different conversation. But, sometimes I meet people and they say, oh, my childhood was great. And I'm sure you met people like that. I was not traumatized. I didn't have any experiences like that. Where is the line from like ordinary, negative experiences and trauma? And what could you say to the people who say, I didn't, have anything in my life that constitutes trauma?
So sometimes that's true, right? Sometimes their childhood was great and it was fine. And then it's just like recent events in life that are depleting them, right? And which in a way is very good because at least you had a sense of self. You had a certain amount of psychological capacities given to you by your parents. But then maybe there were like devastating events in adulthood. Maybe you were a victim of violence. Maybe there was a sudden fire in your home, a divorce, economic downturns during COVID, people who lost their businesses, their jobs, had to move suddenly, right? And in a way, that's really good because if you think about knitting a sweater, right? So if you have a sweater that has a hole in it, if you can sort of unravel it and reknit it because the basic structure of the sweater is there, you have the yarn, and if you know what you're doing, you could unravel, reknit, and fix it. when you've had a very traumatic childhood, it's like we don't even have a ball of yarn, right? To start knitting the sweater, we'd first have to go to a store and buy a ball of yarn. At least you have the yarn, right? We can knit you back together. Yeah. Over COVID, I spoke to somebody on Instagram who over COVID, her business collapsed, her marriage collapsed. One of her kids became very sick with not a COVID related illness, another illness. And they ended up having to move like several states because of her child's medical treatment. So in the course of 3 years, there were like six major traumas that happened, like a cascading effect, right? One into the other, into the other, into the other. But her childhood really was fine, right? And she had good enough attachment and she had good enough experiences and, a healthy, pretty normative childhood and adolescence and young adulthood. Now she's got these traumas and she's still reeling. And, in the book, we have like different types of post-traumatic parents. And what I was able to explain to her is you're not even a type yet. You're still in what we call survival mode. Like your brain is going, whoa, 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 what just happened? Right? It's like the quiet right after the storm. Like suddenly you're in a new state, in a new reality, a single parent, in a completely new industry, still dealing with all the bills and all the financial mess that the old stuff left you with, figuring out co-parenting with a spouse who lives several states away. Like it's a lot. And now you're suddenly going like, whoa, what just happened? Like you just suddenly woke up and you're like, wait a minute. And yeah, the fact that you're reaching out to me on Instagram and saying all this means you're coming out of that frozenness. Like in clinical terms, we would call you acute stress disorder, right? Like so many stressors happen so close together. Your brain was just like focusing on, to quote Frozen, like the next small step, right? Like you're just focusing on like the next practical step. We've got to sell this house and move to that house. And then like I've got to find a job in this new state. And I've got to figure out the doctor schedule with my kid's hospital and his illness. Right? Now that all that's sort of starting to be figured out, you have to put together a new sense of self because you want to continue parenting. And you're so depleted. And that makes sense. And you're just coming out of it.
New to Authentic Parenting Podcast, welcome to a journey of healing and transformation. Since 2015, we've been pioneering the conversation on trauma-informed parenting and how doing your own healing work can make you a better parent. With over 10 years of content, it can feel overwhelming to know where to begin. That's why I've curated a special playlist just for you, a collection of 10 hand-picked episodes designed to help you get started. Do you want to understand how trauma impacts your body, brain, nervous system, parenting, and relationships, and how to heal and transform your life? Join world-leading experts like Dr. Gabor Mate, Deb Dana, Dr. Paul Conti, Dick Schwartz, and many others who have shared their wisdom on our show. Start your journey today. Download your free trauma kit now at authenticparenting.com/trauma kit. authenticparenting.com/trauma kit. You said something very interesting. You said it's not a type yet. I'm wondering if you can speak about that and then we can go into the types. You said she was in survival mode. It wasn't a type yet. When does it become a type and what do you mean by that?
So once you're post-traumatic, what happens to us when we're traumatized is the brain develops what I call a trauma app. And the trauma app is sort of your survival instinct on steroids. It's an algorithm your brain creates to help you navigate the world. So let's say you're a very little kid and we're going back to childhood trauma and, you're bullied and you realize that if you ingratiate yourself and you're really nice to everyone, then that protects you because people don't want to bully you. They'd rather sort of treat you like a non-entity. So you become a people pleaser and you really learn how to people please. And maybe at home you have a critical parent. So you learn how to people please them. You people please your classmates. You people please everybody. And that becomes your survival instincts. The minute there is any sort of psychological turmoil in a room, you come in, you calm the troubled waters, and then you feel safe again. Whether you actually are safe may not be the same thing, but you feel safe, meaning sometimes you placate a drunk guy and you get into a car with him when you shouldn't. You're not safer, you're less safe. But your trauma app makes you feel like you're more safe. So, and you might develop the trauma app in the moment of trauma, maybe when you're 11, maybe when you're 7, maybe when you're 5, maybe when you're 15. But your understanding of the world was limited then, right? You're a kid. And the trauma app, or you were a traumatized person, and trauma gives us like tunnel vision. So even if you develop it in adulthood, there's a certain tunnel vision. And then you keep enacting. The minute you feel stress, you do what the trauma app tells you to do. Now, this doesn't work well with parenting, right? Because when you're parenting, sometimes you're going to cause your kid distress, right? Sometimes it's like you got to put on your shoes before we go to the playground, or it really is bedtime. Screen time is over. No teenager, you cannot buy a t-shirt for $600 that looks exactly like an undershirt, except it has a designer logo on it. Like, no, we're not going to do that. But your teenager gets mad and you can't tolerate mad. Your trauma app says, people please. And you walk out of the mall with that $600 t-shirt, right? Or, you're lugging a 40-pound toddler around the playground because the pavement is too hot, but he didn't want to wear shoes. But when he had a meltdown, you were like, okay, you don't have to wear shoes, right? And now your back is hurting. So what tends to happen is based on your trauma app, we develop certain overall types of post-traumatic parents. And this is after like 20 years of working with post-traumatic parents and having people walk into the office. I tend to get these types. You either have a post-traumatic parent who is perfectionist, who's trying to do parenting perfectly because their trauma app was like, my kid cannot go through what I went through, so I'm going to do it perfectly. And those are the people who try to gentle parent often. They try to follow scripts and approaches, and they're always like attuning to whether or not they're doing it right because they're protecting their child from their own lack of trust in themselves. Then we have disengaged parents. Disengaged parents are trying to save their child from the greatest danger in the world, which is themselves. So what they tend to do is they dissociate a lot. They outsource parenting a lot. So they might hire a tutor to do homework with the kid. They might hire a child therapist, not because anything's going wrong, but just because like my kid needs someone to talk to. That someone can't be me. Maybe the youth pastor is going to give the kid the sex talk, right? Like anyone who isn't me can do this better than me. And sometimes it's a very good coping tool in your professional life. Like delegating is great if you're a CEO, but it doesn't work for parenting, right? A lot of disengaged parents are workaholics. A lot of disengaged parents are very addicted to their phones, but really they're just staying away from their kids because they're just terrified. It's sort of like, I need to smooth my rough edges because my rough edges are very sharp and they will hurt you. So I'm just going to stay away from you. Some disengaged parents are like, I would say functional alcoholics, where mommy wine culture gets a little much, or, maybe they're a gym addict, but there's something they're doing, they're engaged with that isn't their kid in an effort to protect their kid if you go deep down into it. Then we have entangled parents. So entangled parents are so entangled in a family of origin or in a toxic relationship, like a toxic ex-spouse, or even a friendship. Sometimes it's a boss, right? So sometimes it's a job that's very, very well paid, but very, very demanding, where the boss really doesn't treat you as a human who like has a schedule and a life. But the idea is you're so entangled in the other relationship. Like if you picture a fish that's tangled up in a net, you'd like to swim towards your kids, but you're so tangled up in like the drama with your ex-spouse, or your family of origin keeps pulling you into their stuff. Your coworker, your boss is like, oh, it's 5 o'clock, you're supposed to go home. It's one report for me, and the report takes like 2 hours, but like your kids do not want to stay in daycare till 7 p.m., right? You have a life that you'd like to go back to. So you're entangled and you don't know how to set a boundary. And then we have the paralyzed parent. Paralyzed is somebody who very often looks frenetically busy, but they're not doing anything effectual. So they're running around trying to clean up, and the toddler's having a meltdown, and then the 11-year-old wants their attention, and they're like running around. And very often that has to do with a lack of discernment. Very often from very critical parents or narcissistic parents or borderline parents who didn't allow that post-traumatic parent to develop a sense of self. A lot of times you have paralyzed. I tend to see a lot of paralyzed mothers. I'm gendering it a little bit because there are paralyzed fathers too. But the thing is, paralysis in fathers just sometimes looks more like disengagement. They're just like, forget it. I don't know how to parent. My wife can do that. So those are the types. And then we have survival mode, which is not really a type yet.
Okay. So what would be the opposite then? What would be quote unquote normal parenting that's not paralyzed, that's not disengaged? What's the optimal parent?
So the optimal parent is what we call R2, responsive and responsible. It's a parent who is able to be attuned to their child and also appropriately set limits without hangups about, if I set a limit, my kid will be in distress. If my kid is in distress, they're going to think that I don't love them. right? And sort of being able to understand that, like, your kid's not you, your kid has you, right? You felt alone in your distress. Your child won't be alone in their distress because you're there. So you might say no to that $600 t-shirt, and you might be treated to a whole snark about how you're making her commit social suicide and no one in her class will ever talk to her again because she doesn't have this t-shirt and this is the worst day of her life ever. And you're going to sit there and be and say like, yeah, it sounds really hard. You really want this t-shirt. I'm really saying no to it. And that's really frustrating. And you really wish you could have that t-shirt. And I wish that you could have whatever you want whenever you want it. And I also know that that's not good for you. And buying this t-shirt's not consistent with our values. So we're not going to buy it. Or I can give you $100 towards the t-shirt because that's what I was planning on spending on you today. You can figure out a plan for earning the other $500 if you'd like, and letting the child learn from experience. There are many options. That would be an R2 parent. Not leaving you alone in your distress, but I'm also not afraid of your distress. Sometimes you're going to be upset. You're human.
But it takes a lot to get there as a parent. You are a parent too. I'm a parent too. I've been a parent for 17 years. That takes time to get there, to learn, to grow, to heal. So what can we talk about that process, perhaps? What it might take someone to get to that place? And, is it doable? Is it learnable? Is it too late, right? People want to know these kinds of things.
First of all, it's never too late to repair. And we know in relationships that it's not the rupture, it's the repair, right? Like that's Tronick's research. The idea that, relationships actually get stronger when we repair them, when we really repair them. And we say like, oh, yeah, that classic moment where you send your kid to school and they say that their tummy hurts and you're like, no, you're fine, you don't have fever. And then they throw up in school. And that repair of, I should have listened more. You really were telling me something and I didn't pay enough attention to it. I was in such a rush. We were all in a rush in the morning. And, taking responsibility, which doesn't necessarily mean like the words I'm sorry and the words I forgive you. Taking responsibility could just be like, in the future, here's what I'm going to do, right? Here's what I've learned from this situation, like, and joining them in their distress. And then that's right. You repaired it. What should we do next time when we're in that situation? Because I can't let you stay home from school every time your tummy hurts. Because sometimes tummies hurt in the morning and it's nothing. It's just noise. It's not signal, right? It's just like the morning. So what should we do? Should we have a code word? Should we, and come through it? And also like the normalizing of it was very upsetting to throw up in the nurse's office, right? You really wished you could have been home. It's so yucky to be nauseous out of the house. And now we're home together and I'm going to make you tea and I'm going to sit with you. And you're going to stay home tomorrow and then your tummy's going to be better. Right. And like sort of this is like the normative life experience. Because when we make it like, oh no, I'm awful. I'm the worst mother in the world. Do you forgive me? Then we're putting the child in charge of our emotions, right? And then like, we're objectifying the child, right? We're making the child responsible to make us feel better. I'm an adult. I'm responsible for my adult emotions. My child is not responsible for my emotions. If I've repaired appropriately, my child's going to feel heard and supported, right? And they're going to feel like mom cares. Mom attuned with me. Mom gets it now. And then we've learned something from it. The relationship gets stronger. We can't awfulize rupture.
What if someone grew up not have, most people didn't have that kind of, they were not parented that way, right? They didn't have role models. It was not done onto them, the communication and the co-regulation and all of those things. And a lot of people are struggling. It would be nice, right? It would be an when you were talking, I'm like, wow, with this AI and stuff, like imagine if they created a perfect robot mom or dad, like a parent who knows what to say, how to say, like what would that look like? I was just thinking.
Child wants you, right? Like your child doesn't want a robot. Your child doesn't want the perfect answer and the perfect, right? But they want you.
No, I'm just like imagining like a movie as you are talking. I'm getting distracted. So the healing process for the parent, I think that's what I'm interested in your approach. What do you recommend? What do you see working? Like, what's the fast way to get to that optimal place for a parent who had trauma, like as you call it, post-traumatic parenting? I mean, are all parents, do you put all parents in this post-traumatic group?
I think that, there's so many ways to answer what you're saying because we could go in so many tangents with that.
Yeah, take it how you want. Yeah.
I think that Whenever someone says, I try to do X, but Y happens, I really try, like I really want to, and then Y happens. Usually there's some traumatic origin to that. I wanted to stay calm, and then I yelled, right? Somewhere you learn that a certain level of stress means yell. That instance of learning sounds like a trauma app to me. Right. I really, really, really wanted to, I really, really wanted to, stay calm. I really, really wanted to listen to my kid in a way that made them feel attuned. And then I kept going to my phone. You know, why? What's going on here? Is it your job is so demanding because you're terrified of not earning enough money for your child? Okay. Is it that the minute your child is asking you something that you're not 100% sure how to answer, you get really stressed out and you need to exit the stress? And the way you exit that stress is you go to your phone and it helps you dissociate? Okay. You learned that somewhere. I'm going to guess you learned that in an instance of trauma, like every single time. So I do really believe that most people are post-traumatic parents. Sometimes, though, the trauma is not a childhood trauma. Sometimes it's an adult trauma. Sometimes it's just a coping tool that you developed because of the way your temperament was, and it might have been a mismatch with your family. And it's not that something so traumatic happened. Maybe someone with a different temperament would have handled that differently. You were more sensitive, right? But you learned something from there. And that instance of learning, trauma is a great teacher. It's just that it exaggerates, right? So you learned something at some point. So that's the way I sort of look at it. But in terms of co-regulated with, how do you co-regulate? It's a skill. Like any other skill, you can learn it, right? We're both therapists, right? We learned how to validate in school. We learned how to do active listening. We learned how to like get to the emotion under the emotion, right? We learned how to pay attention. If like the body language and the words weren't matching, we learned how to say, it's interesting. You're saying you're angry, but your body language looks like you're really scared, right? What's really going on here? Or you say you're so calm, but I notice you're like tapping your knee. Wonder if that tapping means that maybe part of you is not so calm, right? And there's a million ways into that, but those are all sets of skills that you learn in graduate school, and anybody can learn them, right? Any skill, anything that can be broken down into a skill can be learned by a sufficiently willing person. So learn. If you don't know, learn.
How about that willingness? That's what I want to come to. Do you think, because it's a lot easier, right, to buy that $600 t-shirt and please than like learn this whole new way of being and existing. If let's say you are a 35-year-old parent, like where do you even begin? Do you need to go to therapy? Is just listening to this podcast is going to be helpful? Like, what do you think is the fastest way to that place?
Therapy is always helpful.
Maybe there is no fast place, but I'm just trying to give you space to talk about like what's the process that you take people through? What have you learned through your work?
So yeah, it's a great question. In the book, I talk about like I have a lot of training in a lot of different trauma therapy modalities. And if you look at all the trauma training modalities, at least the ones that I am trained in, which is the most common mainstream ones, if you boil it down, in the book I talk about there's 3 steps. There's AIM, acceptance, integration, and meaning. All trauma therapy approaches that I know of that are effective have an aspect of acceptance to them, meaning undoing counterfactual thinking. This happened. Maybe it shouldn't have happened, but it did. I cannot make it not happen, right? So sometimes my counterfactual thinking is like when I think about my father, my father died of a heart attack, and he was a smoker. And when I think of my father, I sometimes get very angry because my trauma app does not know the difference between past, present, and future. And it's trying to get my father to stop smoking. Like, given that he's been dead for many, many, many years, that's not going to happen. He's been dead over 20 years now. That's not going to happen, right? So I have to sort of engage in acceptance practices. This really did happen, right? This is where like flashbacks and PTSD come from, counterfactual thinking, which is like your brain keeps seeing you at the intersection and you're about to turn left. And you know that in real life, what happened was when you turned left, a truck went right into you. and your brain is trying to get you to turn right. But it happened 10 years ago, right? You're not going to turn right. The story happened already. It's a movie that's already been shot. So acceptance is like the number one step. And the reason why I'm saying this is because sometimes people can't access therapy. And sometimes in the book, we have a lot of like journal prompts and meditations and ways where you can do some of this on your own, maybe as you're on a waiting list for therapy, or maybe until your therapist comes back from maternity leave, or, whatever is going on for you until you can afford therapy. So that's one component. You have to come to a place of acceptance. And then there's integration. You have to integrate what happened into your sense of self so that you can move forward in life, right? Like sort of what have I learned from this? Who am I now in the context of what happened? What is my adult understanding of what happened? This is done beautifully in, treatment modalities like EMDR, eye movement desensitization and reprocessing, or IFS, internal family systems, does this really well. But this idea of like, who am I now? A coherent sense of self. Somatic experiencing does this in a different way, like integrating the body, but like there's a way of integrating. Who am I now? And then meaning. You have to make some form of meaning out of it. Whether you create a mission out of it, like I'm going to change the world, like for me, writing the book was my mission, right? Or a micro mission. My children will have a present mom who is not a functional alcoholic, right? My children will never have to scrounge for their next meal because I will always put food on the table and they will know that they're coming home to a predictable home. Whatever, so micro mission or macro mission. I'm going to change the world for all hungry kids, or I'm going to change the world for my hungry kids in my home, right? Either way, you have to make some form of meaning out of what happened to you. Right? Some form of wisdom. Those are the three components to pretty much any trauma therapy. So in the book, I have some journal prompts. Honestly speaking, I think that therapy is the best way to do it if you're using a therapist who's licensed in their jurisdiction and also has credentialing in a trauma-informed approach. Because just because you're licensed doesn't mean that you're trauma-informed enough to work with someone with some serious trauma. But therapy to me is just the shortcut. It's sort of like I could do my own taxes, but a CPA will do them better and more efficiently than me because they know how to do that. Or, an analogy I sometimes use is, if you go to a neighborhood potluck and your friend makes like a really good cake, you could sort of be like the judges on the British baking shows and like tease apart the crumbs and be like, maybe she put in vanilla. I taste like some sort of a fruit flavor in here. Is there cocoa powder? And you can go to the store and buy a lot of ingredients and waste a lot of time and effort and make a cake and try to approximate it. Or you call her up and you're just like, so what's the recipe? Right? And there's no shame in doing that. I find with therapy, it's the same thing. Like the person has a recipe. So go to that person. It probably will be faster.
Authentic Parenting is 10 years old, and if you're new to the podcast, it can feel overwhelming to know where to begin. That's why I have created a special playlist just for you, a collection of 10 hand-picked episodes designed to help you get started. Since 2015, we have been pioneering the conversation on trauma-informed parenting and how doing your own healing work can make you a better parent. If you want to understand how trauma impacts your body, brain, nervous system, parenting, and relationships, and how to heal and transform your life, download your free Trauma Kit now at authenticparenting.com/trauma kit. 10 hand-picked episodes with world-leading experts like Dr. Gabor Mate, Deb Dana, Paul Conti, Dr. Dick Schwartz, and others. Start your journey today. Download your free Trauma Kit at authenticparenting.com/trauma kit. Well, from your experience, I mean, you said you use different modalities in your treatment with, of trauma. Can you say for the listeners, like what's effective for what perhaps, like what have you learned or observed over the years? We've covered EMDR on the podcast, with Deborah Korn and Michael Baldwin. And, we've talked about cognitive behavioral therapy. I talked to Peter Levine we've talked about different modalities. But so like from your experience, maybe you also went through, you did EMDR, right, for your own healing. So what can you say generally from your observations about some of those modalities?
So I do feel like there's many roads to Jericho, so to speak. Like there's a lot of ways to get to where you're trying to go. And sometimes people feel like when approach doesn't work for them, especially an approach that's like touted somewhere on social media that like they did it wrong. Sometimes it's not that it didn't work, it's that it didn't work for you. Right? Like it's a good approach. It just doesn't work for you. Like I find, and a lot of people have this, I find breath work to be very like anxiety provoking and triggering. It does not calm me down, whereas progressive muscle relaxation and other meditations do. So sometimes it's about finding like what works for your nervous system and then doing that. What you really want to do is I like to look at the therapist factors. You want to find a therapist, first of all, who you know is licensed, so you know you're safe, who you know is credentialed, so that you know that they really know the approach that they're working with. Because there's a difference between taking a like 1 day crash course in something like EMDR and IFS and actually being like certified by a credentialing body that says, yes, this person has competence in this approach. But after that, does this therapist make you feel safe? When you're with this therapist and you give them feedback about something, do they hear you out and do they then change that thing? You know, if somebody says to me, hey, that anger guy behind you over there, he's a little creepy looking. I don't like him. Can you remove him? Will the therapist be like, yes, let me remove him and remember that next time, like that shouldn't be there, right? Like it's little attunements like that that you're really looking for in the therapeutic relationship. Because I don't care so much about the modality as long as it's one of the modalities that work. Like I said, I got trained in pretty much every trauma modality that like I know of that exists. And I tend to like move between them with people in the sense that if someone contracts for EMDR, then they're going to get EMDR. But if somebody, comes in and says they want EMDR, and then as we're talking, they're just naturally talking about parts, and it just seems to be the way they process. I might stop and say, I know we said we were going to do EMDR. Does it make sense now that we've like worked on certain traumas and we've processed them? We can stop here or we can go on to IFS, right? And we can talk about internal family systems and we can talk about parts. Or sometimes someone will come in for their intake and they'll say that they want like trauma focused cognitive behavioral therapy or cognitive processing or one of those. And then as we're talking, I just have an intuition that EMDR would be better, or also like I can tell that there's a lot of flashbacks or something that EMDR really is ideally suited for. And then I'll tell them, let's be an informed consumer. Here are other options for you. Why don't you go home, read up about them? I might give them some links, I might give them some books, and then you decide, or let's say, your psychiatrist referred you here and he really thought you need this approach. Can you go back to him and say, upon meeting you, I really think this approach would work better? And then maybe we'll hear more about why he thought that approach. And then we figure it out together. Right. So I think you also do want a therapist who is trained in more than one modality, so that they can go and they can be like, oh, you're talking in the language of parts. Okay, this is how your nervous system processes. Because I think we have different nervous systems. Some people like naturally tap into their body and they need a somatic approach. And some people really hate that. Like that's really triggering for them. And it's not resistance. It wouldn't be the way in. Once you're in, you might progress to that at some point, but it wouldn't be the way in.
Thank you. I think that this was helpful. Can we talk about some practical tools from the book, maybe some reflective questions you can give my listeners, homework, or whatever you want to share from the third part of the book? Like, what do you think would be helpful?
So first of all, I think this idea like you referenced before that it's like really never too late. It's never too late to repair. It's never too late to start parenting differently. Kids really will understand if you say, I used to spank you because I thought that was the right way to do things. And, that's how grandma parented me. But I see that it's not working very well. You don't like it. I don't feel good about it. So stop spanking. And here's what we're going to do instead. And then you sort of have that conversation with your kids. And if they say, yeah, I really didn't like it when you spanked me. Whenever you spanked me, I felt like you don't love me. And to be like, oh, that must have hurt. I never wanted to make you feel like I don't love you. I love you very much. What should we do when, you're getting really loud and rowdy and I really need you to quiet down? What should we do instead? Because I don't want to spank you anymore. So what could we do? Right? Like there's nothing wrong. Kids do not feel insecure when parents take responsibility and when parents say, hey, I'm changing this approach. Like this wasn't working, so we're going to try something else. The opposite, they feel very attuned and they feel very like felt and understood. So there's just nothing wrong with changing a parenting approach. I do think that depending on what parenting subtype you are, and I think the most important, question that you might want to ask yourself to like sort of think about what your parenting values are is, this is a little bit morbid, so bear with me. Imagine your kids are one day writing your eulogy and it's your parenting eulogy and they're saying what they remember about you. This comes from acceptance and commitment therapy. It's a nice values clarification exercise, but they're telling you something. They're just reminiscing. What are you hoping they're going to say, right? Are you hoping they're going to say, when I had a problem, mom dropped everything and she was there for me? Are you hoping that they're going to say, they really enriched my life and they gave me tons of opportunities. Even when it was hard for them, they put my needs first. Whatever, that's going to tell you what your parenting values are. Right. And then it's just a matter of, there's a Henry David Thoreau quote that says, if you have built a castle in the cloud, that's fine because that's where castles belong. And now the question becomes like, right, how do we build the infrastructure to the castle in the cloud? That's what you want. That's your value. So then how do we get you there? Right. So maybe it's like putting an app on your phone where my kid comes home from school at 3 p.m. and from 3 p.m. to 5 p.m., my phone will not turn on no matter what, because my value was my kid said I felt so attuned to when my mom gave me her full attention. If your phone's on and your boss can reach you, that's not going to happen. You're scrolling through your ex-husband's social media feed where everything he posts is a veiled attack on you. That's not going to happen. But if your phone can't turn on for the next hour, right? Then it can't turn on for the next hour. And then you're going to be doing that. So whatever that value is, we just have to build the infrastructure to get there, right? And it's just a matter of like, okay, what skill would you need? What skill would you need for that? What skill would you need for that? And we break it down until you figure out that plan. And sometimes it's as simple as, I tend to yell when there's way too much on my plate. What do I take off my plate? And that might go to boundaries, right? Well, in order to take something off my plate, I'm going to have to say no to my family of origin. That means I have to learn boundaries. Okay, so then how do we learn boundaries, right? And then that's the thing. If I need to, because, inherent in every yes is a no and inherent in every no is a yes. If I say yes to my mom to listening to her vent for like an hour, when my kid is coming home from school, then I'm not greeting my kid and having like a stress-free, homework hour that I wanted to have. If I say yes to staying late to my boss, then I'm not having the kind of evening that I wanted to have with my kids. So there's a no in there. Sometimes it's easier to say no to our kids, right? It's less threatening, but then we feel so bad later on.
Are tools do the tools match to the type of parents that you describe in the book, the 5 types? Do each type has their own specific tools?
Yes. So in the chapters about the types, I sort of talk about undoing that type, like unprogramming the trauma. Then in the parenting hacks chapters, I talk about like age group by age group, like what's important for toddlers, what's important for elementary school kids, what's important for middle schoolers, what's important for high schoolers. And I sort of like double down on like, this is what's important. This is what's like nonsense and someone trying to sell you something on social media. Like, I have a lot of times have parents saying things like, I'm trying to remember that script for how to have this conversation with my kid, and then I forget what I'm supposed to say. This is not Shakespeare, right? Forget the script. I don't care what app you bought that sold you a script.
We all know what that is, by the way.
Okay, right. That to me, that's perfectionism, right? And it's like, I'm so scared to just do it myself. I want to outsource my parenting. But if you could read the script and just have like certain pointers. I want to make sure this kid knows that they should feel very loved. And also this behavior is risky and I'm not going to let them engage in it. That's the overall point of that script. Forget the script, forget the words. Just those are the 2 senses you're trying to give your kid. So and think of it as a seesaw. When you're dipping too far into the feeling loved side, so then the kid's like, so I could go to that party, then start dipping down to the other side of that party is too risky. I am not comfortable with the level of supervision there. It's my job to protect you from something I consider dangerous. This is dangerous. And then if the kid starts feeling very like shamed and blamed, you start going to like, I get it. I get why you want to go. It makes so much sense. Anybody would. And you're not going. What can we do to make it up to you? Is there something else fun we could do on the weekend? Right? Like, let's balance the seesaw. I bet Amy's mom isn't going to let her go either. I wonder if you and Amy, we could go on some sort of an outing instead of that party, right? And like, again, balancing that seesaw. The script doesn't matter. right? So it's approaches like that. I'm very into reading to kids and playing with kids, and a lot of post-traumatic parents are not amazing at that for a variety of reasons. So I go into like, when do you use toys and books and games in parenting? Like if your kid's anxious, there's probably a picture book about a kid who's anxious about something similar. Read that book to your child. In the book, I have this adorable little interaction that I had with my son, who's now 3. He's my youngest. I had sort of like a much older group of kids, and then I had much younger kids. So like my oldest kid is 26 and he is 3. So you can see the age ranges. And he was a little bit nervous to go to daycare for the first time. He was going to pre-K. He was a little bit nervous about it. And we read the books like, Miss Bindergarten Goes to Kindergarten and Llama Llama Mrs. Mama and, books like that. And then he came home from school the first day and he said to me, I was just like Llama Llama. I was shying when I went to kindergarten, but then I wasn't shying anymore. And I said to him, like, and just like in the story, Mama came back, right? And just like in the story, Mama came into your classroom and we looked at all the toys and games together, right? And it was a beautiful way to prepare him. And then also he kept referring to it like I was shying just like Llama Llama. And I just thought it was so cute that he verbed, he turned shy into a verb, like I was doing shy. It was very cute. But like that idea of like whenever there's a transition or something a child's scared of, like, jumping into the pool, there's a picture book. And if you're stuck, go to an independent bookseller or go to a library. Somebody will help you and be like, not only is there a book about that, there's a book about like that precise issue.
That's great. I mean, this age that we live in, right? You can find so many resources. I mean, that's the best part about it. So many books. Do you have on your website a list of resources or things like that? Maybe I can put in the show notes, or do you recommend specific, maybe you have a PDF? I'm just asking this since we're talking about resources.
So on posttraumaticparenting.com, I do have resources. I also have a YouTube channel that's called Post-Traumatic Parenting. And on that YouTube channel, I basically respond to post-traumatic parenting community questions where people will be like, I need 5 games for an anxious child, or what's a Disney movie that will help my child understand this, or what's a book? Sometimes it's like, how do I explain to my parents that I'm only coming to our holiday party for an hour because the minute the alcohol comes out, I leave? Like, how do I say that in a way that's like respectful so it doesn't turn into a whole war in the family, but honors my boundary? So I have it's basically just questions that came in, tons of resources on there. Like I review a lot of games and toys and just like, here's 5 games for a car trip that, if you have a very exuberant kid, that will keep them somewhat busy and engaged. Here are, my favorite conversation starter games where if you want to have like a campfire conversation with your kids, but you don't even know how to start those conversations, there's a company that makes those, So I have a ton of that on the YouTube channel.
Oh, that's great. That's great. I'll make sure I include that in the show notes. This is great. And anything else you can add?
So I also, for post-traumatic parents, I feel like journaling gets a bad rap sometimes because it feels very labor intensive, but I really feel like journaling about your parenting, the good side, the things that went well today, because we're not good at thinking about that. And then the things that were hard today that I want to like troubleshoot or figure out. Because I think then what tends to happen when you journal, especially when you journal in that format, here's what went really well today, here's what I need to work on, is you start seeing patterns and you start being like, oh, it's like that hour when everybody comes home from school and they're all cranky and in bad moods and like supper's not ready yet. Because then it's so much easier to troubleshoot, whether it's from bottom up or top down. Do I have blood sugar? Like maybe I'm irritable because I'm also starving. Maybe I need to have some cut up vegetables in the house so they can immediately like get some food into their system, or they can immediately hydrate, or they can immediately, take a moment to breathe. And then we structure it differently. Maybe I need more support during that homework hour. Maybe I don't do homework with everybody right away, even though I'm very task persistent and I want to get it done. Maybe I only do homework with one kid at a time, right? Like there's ways of structuring it differently. Once you start noticing the pattern, our brains are really good at patterns. And once we start noticing the pattern, it's like, oh, I'm not a terrible mom. I just don't handle 4 p.m. to 5 p.m. Okay, so let's fix 4 p.m. to 5 p.m. So much easier.
Yeah, I think nobody is a terrible mom or a bad mom. And I think most of the problems come from having this kind of, black and white thinking, not only about parenting, but in general, like what is good, what is bad. Did you have a good weekend? Did you have fun? Like we always focus on 2 buckets. about everything, good or bad, good or bad, good or bad. And then we bring that mentality to parenting. And I just want to say to parents, just throw that type of thinking away. It's not helpful. It's not useful. You are a good parent, no question. Even if they make mistakes, like what's a mistake? What's a parenting mistake? Right? Why would we even say that? These are relationships and there are ups and downs. Recently somebody called me, a potential client. And this mom asks me, she left a voicemail. First of all, I saved that message for to use someday on a podcast, that question. Then I called her back and she asked me, she's like, I just want you to assess me and tell me if I'm a good parent. I said, oh my God, like my heart really broke in that moment. I'm like, what do you mean? I asked lots of questions to understand if this is what she means. She's like, yes, I don't feel like I'm doing the right thing. I think I'm damaging my kids. I feel like I have, failed as a parent and I'm just not a good parent. And I want someone from outside like you to come and tell me, like, what's the damage basically? I said, oh my gosh, like, this is not how I want any parent to feel, But I feel like if I can give advice to parents, it would be try to live a day or even a week without thinking about things, good or bad, positive or negative. Just view things as experiences. However they are, don't attach a value. Don't judge. Don't say, did you have a good weekend? Did you, have fun at that party? Like we set ourselves up for failure and for feeling terrible about ourselves, especially when it comes to parenting,
Because bad information is more sticky, right? Because it's usually the uncomfortable stuff is the stuff that's survival related. So automatically our brain attracts to it and looks for it, especially if we've been traumatized or anxious in any way. But there's also, that beautiful metaphor from acceptance and commitment therapy, the chessboard metaphor, where, every time you have a good thought about your parenting, think of that as like, you think of those as like the white pieces, let's say, right? And they're saying, that, you're a great mom, today you made a really good supper, everyone ate it. Then come the negative thoughts and they're like, yeah, but you yelled when she spilled her milk, right? So think of it in this chess game, like for every piece on one side, there's a piece on the other side. No matter how many good thoughts you have, you're going to have a bad thought, a good thought, a bad thought, a good thought, a bad thought, right? You're not the thoughts. You're the chessboard. You hold the thoughts, but you're not the thoughts. Right. So if you look at it that way, like, oh, I'm having the thought, I was a really good mom today. I made a delicious supper and everyone ate it. I'm also having the thought, you yelled when she spilled her milk. Huh. I wonder why that thought came up the minute I had the good thoughts. So interesting, right? And then it's much easier to relate to your thoughts as data. Like a mistake is data. Yeah, I didn't handle that well. I yelled. Why? Let me learn from that.
Yeah, I mean, I know it's easier said than done, right? We feel badly about every little thing we do, a little mistake we make. It just colors our entire parenting experience, unfortunately, and we forget all the good things, all the small good moments. And we forget that our experience is different than our child's experience.
Yeah, we almost think we have to hold on to the bad thoughts because that keeps us honest, right? Like very often in IFS, right? The part of you that criticizes you and yells at you is trying to keep you on the straight and narrow and keep you behaving well. So we think we have to hold on to that. But the truth is when humans feel worse, they do worse. That's the actual truth. So we have to sort of figure out a way to be like, wait a minute, like my inner critical voice, stop. I've got this, right? Like, I don't need you to criticize me this way. And then it can go so much better. And you're right, it's so much easier said than done. Like, I'm talking about this as though I came to this. When I became a mom and I knew I had PTSD, I felt like my poor kid, she is going to be damaged by my damage. There's no way. It's the worst. I remember the nurse saying, I went to a well baby visit and the nurse saying, what do you do? I said, actually, I just started graduate school. I want to become a child psychologist. And the nurse was like, oh, your baby's so lucky. She's going to have a child development expert as her mom. And I remember having that thought of this poor baby has me as her mom. right? Like that's what it felt like. So when we say it, like those movies like The Karate Kid or Rocky, where like there's the training montage and like it starts out like they're out of shape and they're weak and they can't do anything. And then there's like cool music and 10 minutes of like running and jumping and they get better. And then suddenly they're the champion. It was years of healing is like that training montage. Like a Disney movie makes it 10 minutes. It's many years, right? It's a lot of healing that goes into it. I don't mean to oversimplify it. Like if anybody's listening to this and being like easier said than done, absolutely easier said than done. But what's stopping you from the doing, right? Like you can do it. It's just a matter of starting. And I hate the word just. I should keep myself honest. I always say just is a 4-letter word. I really hate that word. It's simply a matter of starting.
Yeah. And I'm sure, people who are listening to this podcast are on the journey. They have started it and they are on different parts of the journey. In our support calls, we always say that we all face the same challenges, but maybe I moved on from that and you're still getting to that. We're all on the same journey, on the same trajectory, and it may look different for someone else, but it doesn't mean they're better than you.
Yeah. And you can get there, right? That's the function of envy. When you look at someone else and you say like, wow, she's so this, and you have that sense of shame, instead it's like, oh, I value being like her. How do I get there? Because that I could do. Right? What would be the skills I would need or the lifestyle I would need? Or maybe I can't get there. Maybe you're looking at some like lifestyle influencer on Instagram and like she's giving you this like parenting thing about like how she uses gentle parenting with her kid and she has 1.5 kids and, spouse who's an investment banker and you're parenting 6 kids in a 1-bedroom apartment with, coercive and controlling ex-husband. You may not be able to reason with every one of your children in the way that she does. Like you may just be like, oh, can't actually be her. Who can I be like who's navigated my circumstances? And let me pick that person, right? And maybe I delete her from my feed.
Well, I mean, that's the downside of the social media and the proliferation of parenting advice. It seems like everybody is a parenting coach. Like when I first started my podcast 10 years ago, that was like an extension to my parenting practice. Like my friend says, wait, Anna, you are like one of the originals. No one was doing parenting work. Now everybody is a parenting coach. And I mean, there's good and bad with that, right? Like, why are we talking about parenting so much and it distracts people? Like they pull your attention here and there, and some of it is not necessary information. They make you feel bad, like you started this podcast by saying that, and just because you don't follow this person, this influencer, like you said. And I can tell you there is one. I'm friends with lots of people, other podcasters and moms and things like that who are on social media. So once I had an outing with one of them and her family, and what she portrays on social media is so different. The way she handled the parenting situation. And maybe, yes, that was one situation, but I think it was quite telling. For me, I was blown away. And honestly, I can't share who she was, what it was. I can never speak about that. But I was just blown away that her persona online is nothing like her real parenting. And it was so striking for me. That day was this rude awakening that whatever you see on social media is not. And some of these people may look like they have their lives together and that's perfect parenting and things like that. It's not. And I'm telling you, it was such a moment for me. I will never forget that.
Yeah, it's very, very, very true.
That, wow, this person teaches people and certifies other people to become parent coaches and things like that. And this is how she behaves and handles. And yeah, it was more than maltreatment. It very severe, what I noticed.
Yeah. And I've seen instances of that, but I've also seen just like the right advice for the wrong person. Like I remember when I have PTSD and I have pretty severe flashbacks and very bad dreams. And I remember reading.
So can I ask you something? Do you still have that or?
I still have I very rarely have flashbacks now, but I'm still an extremely light sleeper. I still have panic attacks, particularly when I hear very sudden, very loud noises. Like I don't handle very overstimulating environments well. I just get very on edge and tense because like probably it's a part of my brain that's anticipating a panic attack. I handle my panic attacks well, but I definitely still have panic attacks. I don't think I will ever not be a light sleeper because my trauma happened in the middle of the night, and you could read about it in the book. I don't want to recap it here.
Yes, I did. Yeah.
I'm just saying for anybody listening, like it's a disturbing story and I don't have time to set up the necessary trigger warnings, but I will always be a very, very, very light sleeper. I'm like, that's never going to go away. So when I would read about co-sleeping and how the only way to preserve attachment is co-sleeping, which, in certain corners of the internet is how it sounds, I would feel so much guilt and shame. And like my baby is going to feel alone in the middle of the night because I'm not co-sleeping with them. Or sometimes because I'm a very light sleeper, occasionally I'll lapse into like a brief moment of a very heavy sleep, right? And then I'll go into light sleep again. What if I miss my baby during those moments, which made me even more hypervigilant and made my sleep even worse? And I remember just like talking to a professor of mine who was a real objects relations professor. She had been a student of D.W. Winnicott, who was the person who spoke about like good enough parenting. And she was like, Robyn, you can't co-sleep. You could kill your baby if you co-slept. Like you have violent flashbacks in the middle of the night. It would be unsafe. You don't want to put your baby through something unsafe. You have to tell your shame it's just wrong. Right. And it just put that whole unjustified shame and guilt into perspective. Right. And, I learned over the years how to handle middle of the night wakings. In fact, for years, I used to wake my babies up. And I remember one time telling my mother-in-law that I woke my baby up, to nurse her. And my mother-in-law was like, if your baby's sleeping through the night, you're supposed to let them sleep through the night. Right. Like, that's what you want. You're not supposed to wake them up. I was like, oh, you're not? I was like anxious after 3 hours. If she didn't cry, I needed to make sure she was breathing. So I woke her up and I fed her. My mother-in-law was like, no, she was sleeping longer stretches, which again, sometimes we're trying to do these things like breastfeeding, right? That really was done historically in villages with lots of moms and aunts and grandmas teaching the younger mom how to do these things. And now we're just like handed a baby and a pamphlet about how breast is best. And then it's just like, go forth and do that best, right? You need someone to teach you and to talk you through it and to learn. You need to do this in a community of women, particularly with nursing and things like that. But had I not said that to my mother-in-law, I don't think I ever would have known that like, you're supposed to not wake the baby up, right? Like that's a good thing. But my hypervigilance was like, is she still breathing? She's still alive. I need to check on her, right? And I had to learn because, of course, my trauma app made me feel safer. But if I'm chronically underslept and then I get behind the wheel of a car, I'm less safe, right? Feels safer to wake her up every 3 hours, but I'm not safer then. I'm not a better mom to toddlers who can be annoying sometimes and make you feel irritable. Even a child psychologist with having undergone a lot of therapy, I can tell you that, when your toddler takes off his sneakers for the 37th time in a row and you are late, you're going to feel anger, right? Like that is the emotion you will feel. What you do with it is another conversation, but you're going to feel the emotion anger, not because you're a bad person, but because you're a human, right? And if you haven't had sleep on top of that, then the chances of that anger bubbling out in a way you don't want it to is higher. It's as simple as that, right? So me waking up my baby in the middle of the night wasn't making me a better parent or a safer parent. It was making me a worse parent and a less safe parent. So I had to learn that. But honestly, had I not asked the question, I never would have known.
Yeah, that's a good story. Well, I mean, we can go on and on and on and on, but I think I really appreciate your time and our connection and our conversation. I want to thank you very much for today.
Thank you so much. I really enjoyed our conversation. You asked such great questions.
Thank you.
That concludes today's conversation, my dear listener, and I hope you found this episode helpful and inspiring. Be sure to hit that follow button so you don't miss future episodes, and take a moment to leave a rating and review. It really helps others find the show. I would love to hear your thoughts and takeaways. Join the conversation in the Authentic Parenting Facebook group or visit the contact page at authenticparenting.com/contact to get in touch. Authentic Parenting is an ad-free show, and your donations is what makes this podcast possible. Support the show by visiting authenticparenting.com/support or becoming a patron at patreon.com. Your contributions make it possible for me to continue bringing you weekly episodes. And as always, connect to the present moment, to yourself and your children. Until next week, I am Anna Seawold. Thank you so much for listening. This episode was edited and produced by Aminur. If you need expert support to bring your dream podcast to life, from editing to full production, Aminur can help make it happen. You'll find his link in the show notes.